Good morning. Good morning. We are now live on Facebook and YouTube. So I want to welcome you all to another session of Lockdown Inspiration and Daily Learning. I see everyone's logging on now. It's wonderful to have you here, both on Facebook and YouTube. So welcome aboard. And thank you for joining us. We're just going to allow for some time for people to log on and to connect. So please bear with us for just a few moments while that happens. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for logging on. Good morning. Keep on posting your greeting messages. I'm going to welcome you personally in just a moment. Okay, let's welcome you all here. Who's with us live on Facebook? Thank you for posting your greetings. Let's see. Lots of people. Nice. Come on, guys. Let us know you're here. I see lots of people watching, but not many comments. I want to hear from you. Come on, guys. For those of you on Facebook, just share your comments coming through. Oh, there we go. Now I can see. Okay. Shirley Feldman, good morning. Robert Levy, Aline Dulovitz, Norman Stain. Great. Michael Stain, Boker Tov. Thank you. Ronnie Kotkas, Lionel Rubin, Mura Dworkin. Mura, Mazel Tov on your grandson's wedding in California. Mazel Tov to you. Ian Clemenson, good morning. Anne Hack, I can see you. Others are logging on, so just let us know you're here. And tell us good morning. Fega Sega, good morning. Thank you. Wonderful to see you all back online for another session as we conclude the week. Just allow for time for people to log on. Just give us a few moments. Thank you. Morning, morning. I see you all logging on. We're just giving you a minute or so to allow people to log on. And I'm going to be with you and start the program in just a moment. Thank you for joining us. All right, here we go. I'm going to finish off the list of people who are watching on Mustaine. Thank you. Okay, great. Larry Cohen, fantastic. Daryl and Shelley Smith, good to have you online. Manfred Kalmick, Dawn Arlovitz, Vega Sega, welcome, welcome, welcome. Great to have you here for another session of Lockdown Inspiration and Daily Learning. Good to have you all here. I want to discuss a topic of today, and that is, let me begin with a story. There's a story told about a righteous man by the name of Reb Moshe Meislish. And Reb Moshe Meislish was a student of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. And it was at a time then when Russia, or Soviet Russia, or Tsarist Russia, was at war against the French, led by Napoleon. And Napoleon was leading the French into battle against Tsarist Russia. Now, it was well known that Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, good morning, Ruth Kaplan. It was well known that Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi actually preferred or spiritually backed the Tsarist Russians, the Russians, to win the war. And he was praying and davening and doing all that he could to prevent Napoleon from winning the battle against the Tsarist Russians. Why was that the case? Because the Russians believed in poverty. They believed that all the wealth belongs to it. Everyone must live with no money and in great difficulty. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman believed that was the right environment for the Jewish community. Because when the Jewish community doesn't have finances and well-being, that's when we remain more focused and more connected to the ways of Hashem. He was very concerned about the French. The French were leading a revolution that wanted to promote freedom and self-worth and self-value, and finances should be free and businesses should be free. There was a free world of the French. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman was concerned that if we allow for this to happen, and the Jewish community then experience such freedom led by the French, that is going to cause huge problems with the Jewish level and Jewish observance of Am Yisrael. Listen to the perspective. And so he believed, and this changed, by the way, over the generations. He believed, I'd rather promote victory of the Russians than victory of the French. And that was his. There were many great leaders at the time that differed to him, that argued with him. There were many great leaders that believed that we got to daven for the freedom of Klal Yisrael, the freedom of the Jewish people. But he believed that poverty and challenges and difficulty and persecution, well, persecution not, but poverty, yes, would be the right environment rather than financial freedom. Those of you on Facebook, please press like to this video and share it with your family and friends so that others can see what you're up to and hopefully join us too. I want to welcome you all for being here. We've got close to 30 students between Facebook and YouTube right now. So well done for joining. Anyway, Reb Moshe was a student of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, and he went in to be a spy against the French. He went into the inner chambers of Napoleon's top officers, and they were busy strategizing and planning and preparing for war against the Russians. And he sat there in their meeting, obviously looking at their maps and understanding how it was going to happen and where they were going to come from and what their strategy was going to be. And there he was busy watching this all. And suddenly in walks Napoleon. And suddenly he walks in and he looks around the room and he notices someone he doesn't recognize. And he says, "Imposter, we've got a spy among us," pointing to Reb Moshe. And he goes up to Reb Moshe Meislish, was his surname. He goes up to Reb Moshe Meislish. He puts his hand on Reb Moshe's heart. The goal is to see whether he's shaking and nervous. Interesting, hey? If you ever want to catch someone out Just put your hand on their heart and see if they're shaking, if they're concerned, if they're nervous. So he puts his hand on Moshe's heart to see what's happening, and he feels nothing. Nothing changes in Moshe's heartbeat. Nothing changes. And so Napoleon realizes maybe that he's made a mistake in his accusation. Eventually, he turns around and he leaves the room. Reb Moshe told over this story to his contemporaries when he was with them shortly after. And they said to him, Reb Moshe, how did you do that? How did you keep your cool? How did you stay in control? How did you make sure your heart didn't give it away? And he said, I'll tell you how. I was taught a very important principle by my teacher, Reb Shlomo Zalman. My teacher taught me a rule that says like this. In Hebrew, it says, Moach shalit al halev. What that means is, naturally, God created the person in such a way that the mind controls the heart. Moach shalit al halev. The mind controls the heart. That's the way we're wired. We're wired in such a way that the brain takes control, intellect takes control, and it controls the heart. What normally happens? Normally we deter, we're off track. Normally, in many cases, the heart goes first. The emotional reaction responds before the intellectual reaction. When we fall into a case of worry, of anxiety, when we fall into a case of jealousy, lo tachamod, don't covet, one of the 10 commandments. Normally what happens is we follow the heart. The heart responds, the heart gets nervous, the heart is attracted, the heart loves, before the mind even has a chance to think through it properly. Even before intellect starts processing. And this is the problem. That's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. In Judaism, the way God wanted it was that the mind should be first, followed by the heart. Because when the mind's first and the mind processes properly and the mind works through things and understands things, that's the way it should start. And then once we've processed properly, then comes the next step of the emotion and the emotional response. Just one moment. Right, so that was Ramosha's comment. It ties into this week's parsha. We've been focusing on the 3rd chapter of the Shema. The 3rd chapter of the Shema was the chapter of Vayomer. And what does it say there in Vayomer? It says, V'lo taturu acharei levavechem v'acharei einechem. Right? Asher atem zonim achareihem. What does that mean? V'lo taturu acharei levavechem means don't follow the heart. Don't follow the heart. Because the heart, if we follow the heart is a deterrent. The heart could detract us or turn us away from where we're supposed to be going. Now, generally, the heart is a good thing. Having emotion is a good thing. Feeling something is a good thing. However, it depends on the order. So what the Torah is telling us when it says and don't follow your heart and don't follow your eyes, what that's saying is just don't let them lead. What should lead is your mind. The mind, the intellect takes control. The intellect processes things properly. And then the heart has to add in the emotional dimension as well. That's the pasuk that's taken from the word Vayomer, the pasuk of Vayomer in this week's parasha. If you have any questions or comments on this topic of the heart versus the mind and which one takes precedence, please will you share them in the comments on either Facebook or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you, and I really appreciate you joining us here every day. We've got over 35 students online with us right now between Facebook and YouTube. It's wonderful to have you all with us. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. The Mishnah says like this. Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, Ayin Roya. Sorry, the Mishnah says that you follow the heart. Ha'ayin Roya v'halev chomed. What's the source of every sin? What's the source of every sin? The eye that sees and the heart that gets attracted. That's the source of every sin. You know, I once had a teacher when I was in high school. And the teacher was talking to us about controlling our eyes and controlling our heart. And he was saying that as you walk down the street, you see all sorts of temptations, all sorts of distractions, all sorts of things that, especially for a teenager and adolescents, they're not healthy for their growth. And he said, what you can't blame a person for is the initial sight. When we see things initially, we can't blame a person for that, because what you see is what you see. Unless you're walking with your head down or closing your eyes like this, what you see is what you see. But the problem is when you take a second look. The problem is when you actually focus and consciously turn around and take a second look at what you should be looking at. That's the problem. So when the Mishnah talks about ha'ayin roya, the eye sees, ha'lev chomed, and the heart wants and desires, you know, we got to be conscious of this. Because we've seen doesn't mean we got to turn back and look again, but rather the mind needs to kick in. When the mind is in, that processes the heart. I see Daryl and Shelley Smith writes a comment here. Think with your head, not with your heart. Advice given to us at a graduation. Wow. And you remember your graduation? You remember your graduation message all the way till now, Daryl and Shelley? That's amazing. Think with your head, not with your heart. Advice given to us at our graduation. Amazing. So that's the message, right? And when it says and don't follow your hearts, right? That means the heart is there to add an emotional dimension. But initially, we've got to follow the mind. The mind is what's supposed to lead us. As Daryl says, right, Delver and Shelley, think with your head. That's supposed to be the process. I often speak to young adults about this when it comes to dating and finding one's, please God, future spouse. Because just think about the world we live in. The world we live in is a world where many relationships are based on attraction, emotional connection, because that was the initial connection. You know, when a guy and a girl meet, there isn't much logical and intellectual discussion. It's more based on attraction and emotional connection. Obviously, nobody walks into a marriage based on emotional connection. So we try and use our brains, our minds, and intellect too to see whether this is the right person for me or not. But generally speaking, the foundation of a relationship is based on where do we meet each other first, at what party, or what attracted us to each other, not based on the logical process and the logical commitment. And this is where the shidduch system, the shidduchim system, is slightly different to others, to the broader secular system. Because in the shidduch system, what takes place is a lot of logical background and logical calculations first, and then comes the emotion. So we'll do the research on the family, the research on the guy or the girl, what's their motive, what's their inspiration, what they intend to do, where they want to go, etc., etc. That's so I'm not suggesting that the shidduch system is relevant to everybody. What I am suggesting is that maybe we've got to learn from the shidduch system, the shidduchim system. And we've got to understand that sometimes having intellect first is important, because when you got intellect first and logic first, then it's a very stable continuation from there. On that topic of intellect and emotion, I want to go on to another discussion which relates to this. But before I do that, let me know. Thanks Daron Shedley, for your input there. Anybody else that would like to comment on this, please do put your comments into YouTube or Facebook. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you for joining us once again. One more idea there that I want to talk about. And there's a concept in Jewish practice, Jewish law, and it's called hirhur. Right? Hirhur. What does hirhur mean? It means inner thoughts. The thoughts that a person goes through. The thoughts that a person has. And there's a few places where, and obviously hirhur could mean intellectual, could mean emotional. Sometimes our thoughts are based on emotion. Sometimes our thoughts are based on intellect. I'm going to move away from the first topic for now and move on to the next topic regarding hirhur. Hirhur means thoughts. And we find the fascinating debate and find it fascinating discussion regarding hirhur as to whether thought is actually considered action. Take, for example, I see Larry's comment. Good. I'll come back to you. So let's stop there for a second. Larry, I met Esty, my wife, through an arrangement, actually. A lot of research went in beforehand. I was in New York at the time. Esty was in Johannesburg at the time. And there was a lot of research, intellectual, logical research taking place behind the scenes for many, many months. Between the two families, there was a shadchan in between. They were all doing research on each other. It was a very, very thorough process of research that goes in. That's generally what happens in shidduchim, in the shidduchim world. And so it was by arrangement. Then we were in New York. She came to New York to meet me, to stay with her siblings. And so we dated in New York. So then we had the chance to see whether there's a physical, emotional attraction, as well as intellectual, because we had the chance to speak through things ourselves as well. So that sort of answers Larry Levine's question. Thanks, Larry, for that question. Appreciate that. So as I was saying, I went on to a slightly different topic, and that was the topic of hirhur, of thought. So the debate is hirhur considered action? Is hirhur considered words? For example, if I study Torah but I don't verbalize it, I just think about it, is that considered the studying of Torah? So again, when we're moving slightly away from our first conversation, but I'm speaking about the concept of inner thoughts, inner feelings. If I think about Torah learning, is that considered Torah learning? If I think about the words of davening, the words of prayer, if I think about the words of prayer, is that considered davening? Daryl and Shelley, I see you put here a Hebrew comment in the comments box on YouTube. Hirur halev al chata. Nope, I didn't get the second half of the phrase. Hirur halev means the thoughts of the heart. That's correct. But I'm not sure what you wrote in half of the phrase. So just maybe clarify what that's about. So one thing for sure, there's a phrase that says, Hirur halev lav kedibur dami. That the emotions of the heart are not like speech. That's what halacha says. That the emotions of the heart or the emotions of the mind or the inner feelings, the inner thoughts that we have are not like dibur, like speech. So it means that although you're thinking about Torah, although you're thinking about meditation or prayer or davening, it's not the same as reading it. Lav kedibur dabi. It's not the same as reading it. So you actually have to verbalize the words, say the words. Many times I find people who are opening Siddurim and they're like reading through the words with their eyes. Very good. Thanks, Daryl and Shelley. Hirur halev in Al Chait and Yom Kippur. Right. Spot on. So your point that Daryl and Shelley are mentioning on YouTube, your point is a little bit confusing here because on the one hand, we're establishing that Hirur halev lav kedibur dami, thinking through things is not the same as prayer. Look before you leap. Good one, David. That's true. And look means intellectually look. So Hirur halev lav kedibur dami means it's not like speech because speech is the ideal way of davening. Speech is the ideal way of praying. That's the ideal way. And so we don't really fulfill the obligation of davening without verbalizing the words. You've got to say the words. If you're not saying the words, you're not doing it correctly. On the other hand, your point is absolutely valid. On the other hand, Hirur halev is something substantial. Where do we see the emotions of the heart or the emotions of the mind or the inner thoughts and inner feelings? Where do we see it relevant? For example, going to the bathroom. When someone's sitting in the bathroom or in the bathroom, ideally you're not supposed to think about Torah learning. Forget about speaking. You're not supposed to think about Torah learning. Now that's contradictory. On the one hand, we're saying it's not like speech, and therefore it's not the right way of davening or praying by thinking through things. On the other hand, we're saying in the bathroom, you shouldn't talk about these things, or even think about these things. So hirur, thought, is actually substantial. Or Daryl and Shelley write that on the Al Chait that we say in Yom Kippur, we actually bang our hearts to show regret over the emotions of the heart. That shows that the emotions of the heart or the inner thoughts or the inner feelings that we have inside of us does actually contribute to the makeup of a person's activity. Hirur halev, the emotions of the heart. And so we find two interesting concepts. What we've spoken about today is how powerful the emotions are and how the emotions can actually drive us. And on the one hand, the mind must take control of the emotions, and the mind must guide us. We must use our logic and our seichel and move forward with emotion, following that. First have the intellect, then follow through with the emotion. That's on the one hand. We parked that conversation. That was the first conversation. The second conversation we had was to discuss the inner feelings and inner thoughts that we have inside of us, whether it's emotional or intellectual. Are they substantial? Are they not substantial? So the answer is they are substantial, but they don't always help you fulfill your obligation. So they are substantial because they are the beginning of sin, for example, or they are the beginning of a mitzvah. They are substantial because you can't think about Torah learning when one is in the bathroom. It's not appropriate. Even though you're not verbalizing the words, you should be thinking about it. So on the one hand, it is substantial what takes place in inside of me, intellectually or emotionally. On the other hand, to fulfill the obligations of davening, of learning, it's very important to verbalize the words, to read the words of the Siddur, to read the words of the Chumash. That's the appropriate way of fulfilling the mitzvah, because dibur, God wants action. Dibur is the process of action in order to pray. So that's been the discussion of today. This concludes another week of daily learning and lockdown inspiration. It's been fantastic. Thank you all for joining us here. It's been a wonderful crowd, over 35 people online with us today on Facebook and YouTube. This afternoon, we have a fantastic program lined up at 4:10 with international guests, Rabbi Dr. Akiva Tatz, as well as the Solomon brothers. So join us at 4:10. You can join us. The link is sidshul.coza/Zoom. sidshul.coza/Zoom. If you put that into your URL, if you put that into your internet browser, that will take you straight to the web page, and you'll be able to join us at 4:10 this afternoon. Candlelighting is at 5:06. We've got an exciting program lined up for Monday night. I'm sure you've all seen it. Tests, tackles, and tries with John DeVilliers and Joel Stransky. If you haven't yet seen the ad, let me know. I'll send you the poster. We hope you can join us on Monday night too. In the meantime, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you all for joining us. Keep safe, keep sane, and keep spiritual. And we'll see you back on Sunday morning, 10:30, YouTube and Facebook. God bless.